Hey everyone, welcome back to the Multithreaded Income podcast. Today is something a little bit different. A couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with my friend David Giard on his show, Technology and Friends. And if you've never watched Technology and Friends, he's up to episode like 800 something something. And you should really go take a look. It's a great overview of just the people in tech over the past several years. And I've been lucky enough to be on his show a number of times. And this recent time, I talked about multi-threaded income, kind of where the idea came from, and some of the folks that we've had on the podcast, and where I think it might be going in the future. So I want to invite you to listen to the episode here in your podcast viewer. And when you're done, do me a favor, go give David a subscribe or say thanks, David, for doing this show. And hopefully I'll be back again on his show in the future, or maybe I'll have him here on Multithreaded Income. But I hope you enjoy this. I'll see you later.
My guest today is Kevin Griffin. Kevin, how are you, my friend?
I am doing well. It's a Friday, so that
Yes,
means the weekend is coming, and I've already had one cup of coffee, so I'm doing all right.
It's funny how your life seems to parallel my life. I've had one cup of coffee. It's Friday here. I'm looking forward to the weekend. And I remember that you and I became MVPs on the same day. We joined Ineta on the same day. We became officers of Ineta on the same day. We've been just following each other around for over a decade.
So if all things work out in my favor, I will be renewed for my 15th MVP award.
Oh my
At
goodness!
the beginning of July.
Wow.
So you could have been in 15-time MVP, David, if you
Potentially,
had just
maybe
stuck to the course. Yeah,
yeah, I know. I was stripped of my MVP when I joined Microsoft 10, 11
pulled
years
away.
ago. So that means that you and I have known each other for over 15 years. That's amazing.
It's been a while. Yeah.
So I understand you have a new project, or a relatively new project, this podcast. Let's talk about it.
Sure. So the name of the podcast is Multithreaded Income, and it's not your typical tech podcast. I have always had kind of a interest in personal finance and building a strong financial foundation for myself and for my family. And just through casual conversations with other technologists, find I'm not alone in these sort of thoughts and conversations. Long time ago, I used to have another podcast called Two Frugal Dudes. Talked about personal finance just for everyone who was interested. And that was fun. And we could always talk about that later if we want to. But we ended up killing that project. And I always wanted to keep that conversation going. Mm-hmm. But since I live and breathe tech and I'm surrounded by technologists, and we have seen the job market kind of deflating in the past year or two, I always thought I'd really like to do a podcast where I talk to people about how to use their amazing skill sets to build multiple streams of income. And when tossing around ideas for a title, it's like, it's kind of like multi-threaded programming. Like I'm one person, but I'm doing multiple things. And that's where multi-threaded income came from, was like, oh, this is a very tech-centric way of explaining what it is we're trying to achieve.
Okay. And just to set some context, you are an independent consultant and trainer. That's your job.
Absolutely. Yeah. About actually, I just had my anniversary 13 years ago. Wow. 13 years ago, I went independent and haven't looked back.
Wow. Congratulations. When did you start this podcast?
I started the podcast in September of 2023.
Okay. And you're releasing what, once a month, once a week, once a day?
I try to do once a week, but day job and stuff keeps me busy. So sometimes it's once every 2 weeks. I try not to keep myself to a strict schedule just because that's just another thing to have to deal with. Right. It also depends on interview availability and and all that good stuff. But if everything was right, it would be once a week.
You mentioned interviews. That mean you have guests on the show and you ask them questions like I'm doing here with you?
Yeah, I have two different formats I'm playing with. One is the typical interview style where I talk to someone in the community who's kind of doing what the podcast is focused on. They have one or more uh, threads of income that they're running with. And then the second format is kind of just a topic conversation. So to give you a good example, I have a friend, we'll call him Sean because that's what I call him on the podcast. And Sean asks a series of questions about what it's like to go independent, to become
Okay.
a consultant. And I'll take one of his questions and I'll just talk about it for 15, 20 minutes. So
Ah,
like, how should you incorporate? Should you have insurance? What type of contract should you have? And the goal is really just to provide as much information and value to the listener as possible.
tell me about the relationship between this podcast and your last one, Two Frugal Dudes.
Yeah. So Two Frugal Dudes started as a conversation with my friend Sean Marin.
Is
And
this the
so
same
not
Sean we
really,
just?
not the same Sean. Sean's a very common name, right? So Sean Marin and I would go out after user group meetings, and we discovered that we both really had an interest in personal finance. So we would talk about in investing, we would talk about debt payoff, we would talk about just techniques that we had learned.
Mhm.
And the ultimate goal of all this is just to have a solid financial foundation for my family,
Right.
um, and not be beholden to a day job for my means.
Mhm.
And one thing you learn when you're having these conversations, and if you ever gone to a conference and you've had a hallway track, so
Oh yeah.
much gets lost to the table. Like there's so much good conversation, it just gets lost to the table. And we decided,
Lost
hey,
to the
let's
table.
record.
Mean wait, that's a good phrase. I think you're saying that we walk away and we haven't captured that. We haven't internalized it.
Yeah,
We haven't shared it with other
it's
people.
it's good for me, it's good for Sean, but the value of that conversation can't be shared with anyone else. So the
Okay.
table is
I
the
like it.
only thing
Lost to the
that
table.
got
I'm gonna steal
lost
that
to the
phrase.
table.
Thank you for that.
That's fine. Uh, so we started recording a podcast, and we actually, in a very small way, exploded into a somewhat popular personal finance podcast. And we were focusing on everyone, like anyone who had money was a target for our podcast. And we talked on a variety of subjects. But you hit this point with a podcast where it's like, all right, it's either a labor of love or it needs to start putting some food in my kids' mouths. And
Why not both?
we, well, it could be both. And it's like, all right, the podcast needs to start earning for itself to justify its existence.
Okay.
And we were looking at various ways to try to give more value in exchange for a little bit of money. And we're trying to do this in a non-sleazy way, because there's a lot of sleazy ways to take money from people and
Yes,
not
there is.
really give them the value in return. And that's just not how I was raised. I was raised to, it is fine to charge someone money for something, but you need to make sure they get something for their money.
Agreed.
And when you have a name like Two Frugal Dudes, it is really difficult. And I learned this, just a hard lesson learned. It's really difficult to sell things to people who are basically a target market of frugality. So, uh, so eventually we made probably a couple $100. It was enough to pay the accountant, basically. And we ended up shutting down the entire podcast. Sean went off and he's doing amazing things right now. I've gone off. I'm doing all right for myself. I'm not complaining, but I still had this ambition to really want to talk about personal finance. And as I mentioned earlier, like the job market kind of shrinking, and there's ample opportunity for technologists to go off and start using their skill set to do other things and not be beholden to the day job. And that's kind of where multi-threaded income sprung up. Was, can we talk about these concepts but really niche it down to technologists and software development?
Oh, tell me about some of the interesting things that you dove into during the last 9 months or so.
Uh, so we talked to a variety of different people on the podcast, and there's several different buckets that we kind of fill in this term multi-threaded income. So the most obvious one is really independent consulting. It's the people who take one of two different courses where they're either a freelancer to begin with, they're working their day job, and then they do some moonlighting or independent freelancing uh, after hours or on weekends. And we will talk to people there about just how do you find your gigs, how much do you figure out how to charge, what are some of the issues that you run into when you have a day job that's your main priority, and then you have these secondary jobs that you're doing. Then there's some people that do the full independent consulting route. They either have lost their job and they decide this is the way to go. I'll just go independent, or they quit their job and decide to go fully independent. That's a whole bunch of stress
Sure.
and things you're trying to get going right off the bat. And it's a journey. It's a ebbs and flows just in terms of your funnel and who you're doing work for. We have some people that have gone off to create their own products, so their own SaaS, software as a service,
Hmm.
or actual software products that you install. And it's fun talking about the stories of how these different ideas come to be, because usually it starts as someone trying to scratch their own niche. So they have a problem, they build a product to solve their problem, realize, hey, I can take this product and sell it to other people. And there's guests with various levels of success with that. Some are just very early in that process, and some have, crossed into the $1 million mark for the business just over time. We have done talks with people who run conferences as businesses and how some of the dynamics of that.
Hmm.
We've talked to book authors, we've talked to course creators, and I keep saying it's me, but it's the community has
You and your
joined me along
audience.
for the journey. Yeah. But we're really open to talking to anyone who's making money. I just recently did an interview with a very nice young lady who was at the beginning of the weed dispensary business and actually building a
Weed.
product to that, and seeing, all right, there's some hardships here. Let's build something for an industry that technically didn't exist at the beginning, and then had to build and grow. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun talking to these types of folks, because they're solving problems and they're eventually building these into hopefully businesses that can go run by themselves, and they're just collecting the passive income from it.
Yeah, I like I like how you threw in that qualifier. Technically, didn't exist. Weed businesses existed for a long time. It's just been legal
Yes.
in some
There's
states.
no point of
for the
sale
last few
system
years.
for the guy on the corner.
It was the ultimate entrepreneur, I think. uh, Tell me about some of your other guests. I'm scrolling through and I recognize a few of these names. I know Jamie Wright, and I know Brian Gorman and
Yep.
Stephen Cleary. Lots of good people here. But
Jamie Wright was a very good episode. Jamie Wright in particular is just an amazing human. He's
Agreed.
one of my favorite people in the world. Jamie, what I love about his conversation was we went into it kind of with this nuance of, well, let's talk about the business aspect of it and hey, this needs to feed you. And Jamie was very much about, look, I would gladly do any of this for free and I'm getting paid just because I happen to be getting paid, but I would be perfectly happy doing all this work just for the fun and he called it the art
for
of
building software for companies, that
building software.
he would do that for free. Okay.
Well, for his own products.
I see.
So there's the means, and then he likes doing all the other things, and he's,
Got it.
I think, finding himself in this position now where he's able to work on and get paid for the thing that he really loves and enjoys doing.
That's right. Why not both?
Yeah. So Jamie was definitely a great conversation.
That's awesome. I actually feel the same way when I became a technical evangelist. I got this job where I was speaking at conferences and writing and connecting with the community. I'm like, wow, I did this for years for free, and now I'm getting paid for it. What a
I
country!
still don't get paid for that part of it. I still do that out of
Well,
my own
neither do I
pocket.
anymore. That was only about 3 or 4 years that I had my dream job. But how many people ever have their dream job? So now, who else have you had? Who are some other interesting guests?
Let's see. If I go down, there was a conversation with Lucas Herman.
I don't think
Herman.
I know Lucas.
He is. I actually found him on. Someone sent me an article, and it was about a stage timer, a timer product that was making like 5 figures a month. And wow. I was like, all right, this is the type of guy I like to talk to. Found a mutual friend of mine and Lucas's, and we got connected. We did the podcast, and Lucas, really interesting guy. He was a developer and was doing something around it was like conference and stuff, and people were having problems with stage timers just to keep track of time in different notes, and there was no industry standard for that type of product. So Lucas built a proof of concept, and someone's like, yes, totally, I will pay you for this. And it just kind of grew up from there. So at its core, it's just a timer. It's keeping track of time. And then there's all these bells and whistles on top of it. And Lucas makes a pretty good living with him as the sole developer. His wife is involved as well with the project. But like, they're doing pretty well for just what you would call a timer. And it was one of those overnight successes that took a long time. Like, we're seeing the end of it, but we talked a lot about the process of getting to that point. And now he's going out and he's starting a second product right now. And it's fun to kind of watch people in the middle of their journey and seeing, hey, they're getting success now, and they're just going to get more success if they keep down this road.
Oh, interesting. And I imagine that on that particular podcast, I haven't listened to that episode, but you're talking less about the technology and how he built it and more about how he's monetizing it.
Yeah, we're really interested in the business of software.
Right.
There's plenty of crap out there talking about the tech, and the tech to me is interesting, but also really boring. Like, no one ever pays because they care that something's written in TypeScript or C# or
Correct.
Are they using Next.js, or are they using Laravel? Like, no one really cares about that.
They care
people
about
care about
the problem it solves.
Exactly, and that's what people pay for. So I'm so much more interested in hey, I built this little product, and it's useful to me. It's useful to other people. How do you price it accordingly? How do you get feedback from your initial customers? How do you find your initial customers? That's just so many little issues that, like, developers, we don't like that stuff. Most developers don't want to go out and try to market to other people and try to get them to sell their thing. They much rather, to an extent, just put something up open source and say, you know what, I don't think this is very good, but here it is for everyone.
That's that imposter syndrome thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on that you wanted to monetize this podcast. How's that happening?
At the moment, it's not. But
sorry.
it's a win hearts and minds first. Okay. And then I think Multithreaded Income is more positioned to be good for some sort of coaching program. We're trying to build up a community first of just people who are interested in the subject and helping them through their journeys. And then eventually everyone hits this point where they just need more help. They need more hands-on, deeper advice. And that's a great opportunity for coaching. And coaching is kind of the first like level up. There's group coaching where you just get people into quote unquote masterminds where they can talk amongst themselves and you're the spiritual guide for their journey. I've gotten a lot of value out of stuff like that. People just in general get value out of that. There's also built-in accountability. So if you say, I'm going to have X, Y, and Z done by the end of next week, if we come to the end of next week and you're not done, I'm going to fuss at you and say, well, what's the problem? Why didn't you get that done? You're holding yourself back by not accomplishing these tasks. There's a level up from that, and it's just in solo coaching where it's one-on-one with a different person. There's ample opportunity for things like courses. I have 2 or 3 course ideas I'd like to do focused around multi-thread income and just starting one of these side threads, whatever it might be. Like consulting is a good one for me. I've been an independent consultant for 13 years. I can talk very fluidly about anything dealing with that. I have a plethora of friends who have done the same thing, kind of bounce ideas off of. And I think I could build a very good structured course in how to get started down that path. But the big reason I haven't gone down that path is I don't have, I need the audience to sell to. So the podcast is about just selling the dream and finding people that are living the dream and showing that the dream isn't out. It's a dream, but it's not outside the scope of your capabilities as a normal person. So let's sell that dream. Let's get the community engaged and built up, and then start offering better products to that community to help them on their journey.
Okay. So building the audience first, and then you'll start marketing to that audience once they're hooked. I'm looking at this multithreadedincome.com, which is the domain that you have, and
It's
I see
a horrible
that there,
website, by the way.
it's not horrible. It's very simple. I love simplicity. And there's a link here for your podcast, of course, but there's also a link for a YouTube channel and a Discord channel and articles. What is it? Is this the same content that you're just?
YouTube, yeah, YouTube is the same content as on the podcast. We just cross post to different places. Everyone consumes content differently. Some like to listen to it, some like to watch it. So we try to make sure we cover all those different bases. The Discord is where the community's at. Anyone's welcome to come hang out in our Discord, ask your questions about starting anything. Actually, some good podcast episodes have come from the Discord. So I would love it if people jumped in and talked about what they're running into, and we can have a discussion there. There's a section for articles. Like I had this ambition that I was going to write articles after all the different episodes just to keep the SEO juice going. But, SEO is dead, right? Because of AI. And I didn't really start doing that. And I should have taken the link off the website, but I haven't done that yet.
Okay. And then I clicked on the podcast, and I see there's a list of episodes. You've got 40 of them out so far. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
And then also there's a link for people, which I think is really interesting. I think I might steal this idea as well, where you have a list of every guest that you've ever had on the show, and a little blurb about who they are, some links to their social media accounts and websites. And everybody so far, because you're less than a year into this, everybody has appeared in one episode except for Chad Carter, who's appeared in 8 episodes. Who is Chad?
So Chad, a good friend of mine, he was there at the very beginning, and we started having an interview episode, and then we would have like a commentary episode where we would talk a little bit deeper about whatever the guest kind of touched on. And Chad was there for some of those initial conversations, as was Sean Merritt. He was there at the beginning of the journey as well. But like we had learned kind of early on, the commentary episodes were taking away a lot from the content. And so we did away with the commentary, and it just ended up being me moving forward.
Oh, okay. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but multithreadedincome.com is the main website. Podcast.multithreadedincome.com is the way to get directly to the podcast. And I see you have a subscribe button right at the top here.
Yes, we do.
With,
Anywhere you get your podcast from.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Amazon. Or you can just listen to it right here in the web browser, I think.
Yep, that works as well. I would love for everyone to subscribe. Like, that just helps everything.
I will. And so will all of my tens of viewers.
I appreciate each and every one of you.
Very cool. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you really want to tell people about this?
Probably not. It's a labor of love for me. I love talking about the business of software and putting it into terms that normal people can talk about. I did a conversation at CodeMash this past year, specifically on multi-threaded income, and we talked about the various ways you can make income. And I got an amazing reception to that talk. I wish more conferences would pick it up because I think it's a very beneficial set of skills that people can develop over time. But yeah, it's really led the way to doing more and more of these episodes. Every time I push an episode out, if I hear something good about the episode, I know I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And it's just a great way for me to give back to the community that's helped me so much over the past 15 plus years.
Kevin, thank you so much. It's always good to talk to you.
You too, David. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Multithreaded Income podcast. I really hope that this podcast has been useful for you. If it has, please take a moment to leave a review wherever you get your podcast from. And don't forget, the conversation doesn't stop here. Join us on our Discord at mti.to/Discord. I've been your host, Kevin Griffin, and we'll see you next week. Cha-ching!